14, I made a contract with the STD devil. Senpai, I'll give you this photo. It's me.
She's a really good girl. The biggest lie in modern manga has to be Chainsaw Man isn't a gooner or fan service manga series. It's really strange to me how the manga has collectively gotten an audience like this. When you go back to like 2020, you have fans within the crowd when the anime was getting announced and Makima's voice actor was going to get revealed. You had fans literally barking at Makima, barking to see Makima.
Who here is a Makima fan?
Woof woof! Woof woof!
And it's like, that's the OG fan base. That's the fan base that everybody remembered. At least I remember when Chainsaw Man was kind of relatively niche. It was starting to gain popularity, but it wasn't as mainstream as it is right now. But it's really strange to me just how many people legitimately, they actually like use this argument that Chainsaw Man is not a fan service or gooner series. And it's like, this is the same offer. Like Fujimoto, in the last chapter, Fujimoto-sensei had 8 panels in a row dedicated to just pantsuit shots from different POV perspectives. So to have these individuals straight up either deny or lobotomize themselves to not even remember what goes on within their manga is pretty impressive, because it's really just shocking to me, because this is a conversation that isn't necessarily just in the Chainsaw Man community. It's also a conversation that is in a lot of manga nowadays that is very saturated with gooner or fan service like content. For example, one that instantly comes to mind is 100 Girlfriends or Panty and Stalking. I've seen conversation around Railgun, and this one's going to shock you, and you probably want to sit down for this one. I've even seen people argue about Fairy Tail and Fire Force, and I'm thinking to myself, like, how does these series that have so much, like, adult content in it, that obviously is meant to be fan service heavy, how does it garner such a purist fan base that is outright disgusted by the content? It's just, it's so strange to me. It really is, and it's like, I've talked about this for a while now, just like the shift or the change of the anime and manga industry and community for the last like 4 or 5 years, thanks to COVID, and it's once again very relevant to this conversation, because if you go back to like 2020, like I said at the beginning of the video, you had the discussion on Chainsaw Man. It was literally people barking and wolfing after Makima. You had people literally barking, okay? I remember seeing the live stream chat when the live stream happened in Japan for the announcement of Chainsaw Man's anime, and there was legitimately people barking and wolfing in chat, and I was just like, dude, it's funny, it's weird, but it's hilarious, and that is the good representation of the OG Chainsaw Man fanbase, and I believe a lot of the Chainsaw Man fans are still there, but thanks to just the public that, you know, it has got, like, you know, it's gotten a lot of eyes on it, I feel like that fanbase has kind of been pushed down or remained a little bit more silent than they necessarily always have been, which is strange, because Fujimoto is a freaky manga author, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think one of the big reasons why Chainsaw Man or Fire Punch or Look Back or whatever, the reason why they're so popular is because Fujimoto-sensei is a very freaky and weird author. And I think if it wasn't for those aspects, I don't think we would just have such high-quality manga series like he presents to a wide audience. But, like I said, it is strange to me that the core fans that would, like, bark after Makima, for instance, I feel like is a perfect representation of what Fujimoto probably wants from his community. But then you have these new fans that will literally make these posts every single week and say, like, they need to examine Fujimoto's brain. They need to actually figure out why he does these things. And obviously, I think this main poster might not be ripping on Fujimoto or even Chainsaw Man. I could be wrong. But obviously, this post, if you look closely, it has over 100,000 likes to it. It has almost 3 million views. And I've already seen it in the quote retweets and in the comment section. A lot of people basically upset with this or saying, what's Fujimoto doing? Or have faith in Fujimoto, he knows what he's doing, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this is a back-to-back thing. Like, every chapter, so often, you have these series focus on some form of fan service-like content. Literally, Denji's first objective, like, main objective within the story, was to touch Oppai, was to get a kiss. It's just like, we had literally a kissing, puking scene, in the beginning of Chainsaw Man. That's not including, like, everything else that happens afterward. Let's not forget the back alley handy. And it's like these fans of Chainsaw Man legit lobotomize themselves weekly. Because how do you not remember all this other stuff that's just been ongoing for over 200 chapters? I'm just like, why is there always complaints about this type of stuff within the story? If there's any, like, fan service or whatever, weird stuff, and you're 200 chapters deep. Like, to put this in perspective, Chainsaw Man is now on chapter 212, okay? And ever since part 2 came out, there's been a rise of the conversation of people being very upset with the type of content I'm talking about in this video. And one thing that really comes to mind and why I think people are saying this is probably because of binge readers. I feel like a lot of people that got into Chainsaw Man probably binge read it all in one sitting, and probably the entire story of part 1 is very, foggy or like vague in their head because obviously they were just speed reading it and not really getting all the context and everything going on within the story. That's the only way I feel like any form of reader that's gotten this far could have come to the conclusion that it's not a fan service series, because they were not reading it weekly. They were not seeing the story progress. They just binged it in one sitting and then moved on. I feel like that's one of the reasons why Chainsaw Man Part 2 has gotten a lot of complaints. If those that don't know, Chainsaw Man Part 2 has gotten complaints of, like, either the art is bad, the story's not going anywhere, or just in general it's not a good manga anymore. People have dropped the manga because it's not what they thought it was. And I'm thinking to myself, like, Chainsaw Man Part 2 legitimately has been, I'm gonna be blunt, I like it better than Part 1. Now, there is aspects of Part 1 I still prefer over Part 2, but in general, the overall story and progression of Part 2, I think, is much better. I have loved the direction of Asa and Yoru as a character. I think Denji as a character, people like to say he hasn't grown or has grown or whatever. I just like him as a character, and seeing the different stages of him and a little bit more mature, but still the same Denji that we know from the beginning, I love him. I love Nayuta. You know, I've loved everything about the Death Devil. I love Fami. I've loved the Falling Devil. There's a lot of good aspects within Part 2. A lot of good themes, a lot of crazy panels, a lot of great moments. And it's just like, I feel like a lot of people that are reading Chainsaw Man at this moment now, or, you know, haven't dropped it yet, are those that, like, jumped on pretty late and sped read it. And then now that it's at slower pace, they're expecting it to be as chaotic and explosive as it was when they binged like 70 to 90 chapters all at once. That's what I think is really one of the big issues. But anyways, back to the core thing I was talking about. I think these discussions around these manga, because like the Chainsaw Man thing I'm here talking about when it comes to people trying to actively deny there's fan service within manga, and then they're upset about it, this is honestly hurting a lot of discussion. I see this so often in so many different anime discussions and manga discussions nowadays. I think it's hurting conversation. And it's one of the reasons why I get so jaded and upset with, like, newer fans that dive into these series and make it popular. Because how are you going to sit down and read a work from Fujimoto, okay, and then complain about it being weird? This man made Fire Punch. He made Fire Punch. And if you have ever read Fire Punch, yeah, no. He is a weird, freaky man. He has videos of him trying to fly. He ate his dead fish. He is a weird offer. Once again, if it wasn't for him being weird, I don't think we'd have high quality like Chainsaw Man or Fire Punch or whatever. But I just don't know how people can't accept this. It's strange to me, man. It's strange. It's like, it's such a weird phenomenon that I think is getting worse with time. And it's very noticeable in the Chainsaw Man fan base, because it's one of those last remaining manga that is, like, very mainstream. Like, there is other mainstream manga, I'm not acting like there isn't. Like, for instance, you know, One Piece. But Chainsaw Man is one of those mainstream manga that is, like, gotten very popular thanks to the rise of, like, Demon Slayer and JJK and stuff, like that type of content, those type of stories. And I feel like it gave rise to the popularity of, like, the newer fans to dive into Chainsaw Man. And I think, since it's one of the last manga series that's in that era, from, like, Demon Slayer to, like, JJK era, that's why there's a lot of fans like it. And I wonder, once Chainsaw Man eventually does come to an end, will those fans gravitate to another series and do the exact same thing once again? I'm legitimately curious. But anyways, I want to leave it at that. This is something I want to talk about. I will say, I legitimately love Chainsaw Man's latest chapter. I think that it's been a phenomenal journey so far. I think that Fujimoto's been cooking very heavily with the story developments. A lot of people might not understand where the story is going, but if you want me to throw in my 2 cents on where it's developing, I think legitimately it's going to develop towards the direction of balance, because obviously there needs to be a balance of death, and there needs to be a balance of war, and all that. It's common traits of humanity, and without those aspects, I don't think you can necessarily be human anymore, and I think that's what's really going to happen, is that there's going to be some form of balancing that comes into play. Another thing that a lot of people seem to be shocked about is the whole STD devil that was mentioned in the chapter, which I showed the panel at the beginning, but Makima at the end of part 1 talks about the AIDS devil. So, yeah, take that as you will. So, it's clear that a lot of people don't pay attention or haven't read the manga in a long time to remember stuff like this, but yeah, it's been mentioned for a while, stuff like that. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Anyways, be safe, stay healthy, and I love you guys. Chibi out.